All right, buckle up. Here come 12 rare GM muscle cars that General Motors built in tiny numbers. Showed off like royalty and then, poof, they disappeared. Let's go deep into GM's vault of the forgotten muscle machines. The 1973 Oldsmobile 442 W30 is a prime example of a muscle car fighting to survive in an era that was actively trying to kill it. By the time this car rolled into dealerships, the muscle car movement was suffocating under the weight of new federal mandates, rising insurance premiums, and a cultural shift away from raw power and towards fuel efficiency and safety. Yet Oldsmobile, stubborn and proud, still offered a W30 performance package, even as GM corporate brass tried to sweep the whole muscle car era under the rug. It was a car born out of resistance, a mechanical protest against the inevitable decline of American high-performance machines. To understand why the 1973 W30 matters, you have to rewind to what it once was. Back in the late 60s, the 442 was a street brawler, the perfect balance of muscle and refinement. When you checked the W30 box in, say, 1970, you were getting a no-nonsense weapon. Fiberglass hood scoops feeding cold air to a 370 horsepower, 455 cubic inch V8, massive torque, and a suspension that could actually handle corners. The W30 badge meant business, but by 1973 the tides had turned. The new colonnade body style, mandated by crash safety standards and corporate design trends, was a far cry from the sleek fastbacks of the past. It was bigger, heavier, taller, with thick roof pillars that killed visibility and proportions that seemed to sag under their own weight. Enthusiasts sneered. The muscle car had gone corporate. Still, Oldsmobile quietly soldiered on with the W30. Underneath the bloated exterior, it packed a 455 cubic inch big block V8, but with severe handicaps. Strangled by emission controls, detuned for unleaded fuel, and hampered by new net horsepower rating standards, the engine's output dropped to an official 270 horsepower. In gross terms, that might have been over 300, but it was a far cry from the fire-breathing monsters of just a few years prior. Despite this, the 455 still churned out a mountain of torque, around 370 kW, which meant that in real-world driving, the W30 could still deliver the kind of shove that made passengers grip the armrests a little tighter. Performance was no longer about raw acceleration numbers. It had become about presence. The 1973 442 W30 still had its functional twin-scoop hood, aggressive stance, and the heavy-duty suspension bits that made it more capable than your average personal luxury barge. The W30 package brought with it a hotter camshaft, better flowing heads, specific carburation tweaks, and unique exhaust manifolds. It wasn't just a badge package, it was still a performance car, even if it had been forced to wear a tuxedo to the fight. But there was no getting around the weight. The colonnade body, reinforced for rollover protection and fitted with federally mandated 5mm bumpers, pushed curb weight well over 4,000 pounds. The additional heft dulled the car's reflexes and stretched out acceleration times. It wasn't slow by early 70s standards, but compared to the 442s of 1970-71, it felt like it was running uphill with ankle weights. The once feared quarter-mile times had slipped into the high 14s or low 15s range, depending on configuration. Respectable, but no longer dominant. Adding insult to injury was GM's marketing indifference. The 442 was no longer its own model, but rather an option package on the Cutlass S. The W30 was an option within an option, buried deep in the order sheets. No big ad campaigns, no glory shots, no muscle-flexing bravado. It was there for the few who knew where to look, the diehards who refused to surrender. Production numbers reflect this decline. Exact figures are murky, but estimates suggest fewer than 1,100 W30-equipped 442s were built in 1973, with the vast majority being automatics. Manual transmission cars were exceedingly rare, perhaps numbering in the double digits. In a year when Oldsmobile was shifting focus to personal luxury and soft-road cruisers, the W30 was an orphan, a relic of a different mindset. Yet, this rarity is precisely what makes the 1973 442 W30 so special today. It represents the end of an era, the last true W30 before the badge was diluted into nothing more than a trim level. After 1973, the performance edge dulled further, and by the late 70s, the 442 name would be slapped onto cars that had no business wearing it. In hindsight, the 73 W30 stands as a defiant last stand, a heavyweight fighter still swinging in the final round. Bloody, but unbowed. Collectors today seek them out not because they're the fastest or the most beautiful 442s, but because they're survivors, symbols of muscle car defiance in the face of bureaucracy and shifting tastes. Every one of these cars is a rolling piece of muscle car history, a bittersweet reminder of what once was and what was soon lost. As one longtime Olds owner once put it, while leaning on his weathered 73 W30 at a car show, "Sure, she's heavier, softer, not as fast as the old days." The 1965 Pontiac 2+2 421 HO convertible was one of those rare machines that, despite its jaw-dropping specifications and undeniable presence, seemed to fall through the cracks of history. Often overshadowed by its smaller, more famous sibling, the GTO, the 2+2 was Pontiac's full-size muscle car built on the massive Catalina platform, but fitted with the kind of muscle and attitude that could humble lesser machines. In essence, it was Pontiac's answer to those who wanted GTO-level performance, but weren't willing to give up the space, comfort, and cruising presence of a full-size car. The nickname it carried, the Big GTO, wasn't just media fluff. With its optional 421 cubic inch high-output V8 breathing through triple two-barrel Rochester carburetors, a legendary setup known as Tri-Power, it churned out a formidable 356 horsepower and 462 of torque. That was serious muscle in 1965, the kind of numbers that made stoplight challengers think twice. In convertible form, the 2+2 was even rarer and more special. With the top down, it combined boulevard-class elegance with brute force. The long, flowing lines of the Catalina body were accentuated by subtle 2+2 badging, sporty bucket seats, a center console, and performance-minded suspension tweaks that kept the big car from wallowing in the corners. Unlike the GTO, which had a boy racer vibe, the 2+2 convertible was an iron fist in a velvet glove, a proper gentleman's hot rod. But there was a problem. Pontiac's own marketing department never quite knew what to do with it. They poured their advertising budget into the GTO, which was a smash hit, defining the muscle car segment for an entire generation. The 2+2, meanwhile, was treated more like a trim level of the Catalina, almost an afterthought in brochures, rarely mentioned in high-profile campaigns. GM's internal policies at the time didn't help either. Corporate reluctance to openly promote street performance in their full-size cars meant that the 2+2 was always lurking in the shadows. Sales reflected this confusion. In 1965, Pontiac built about 11,500 2+2s, but only a fraction were convertibles equipped with the 421 HO and Tri-Power setup. These were bespoke machines ordered by discerning buyers who knew exactly what they wanted. Big power, big comfort, and big style. Performance-wise, the 2+2 was no slouch. In period tests, Motor Trend recorded 0-60 times in the low 7-second range and quarter-mile times in the high 14s. Impressive for a car tipping the scales at well over 4,000 pounds. And this was in an era where horsepower was measured in its most optimistic form. On the street, that tidal wave of torque made the car feel faster than its numbers suggested, delivering effortless acceleration with the slightest prod of the throttle. The driving experience was all about smooth brutality. The suspension was firmer than a standard Catalina's, thanks to heavy-duty springs and shocks, but it never lost its full-size ride quality. The 2+2 could hustle through curves with surprising composure, but its real party trick was long, straight roads, where it could stretch its legs and remind everyone why cubic inches matter. Yet despite its capabilities, the 2+2 quietly faded away after 1966. The muscle car battlefield had shifted to smaller, more affordable intermediates like the GTO, Chevelle SS, and Roadrunner. Full-size muscle cars were considered dinosaurs, too big, too heavy, too expensive for the emerging youth market. Pontiac quietly retired the 2+2 after 1967, turning its focus to models that fit the new performance car mold. Today, the 1965 Pontiac 2+2 421 HO convertible stands as a rare and fascinating relic from a brief moment in time when Detroit flirted with the idea of full-size muscle. Its rarity, coupled with its brute force and understated elegance, has earned it a cult following among enthusiasts who appreciate its unique blend of power and presence. As one collector famously said at a Pontiac meet, standing next to his immaculately restored 2+2 ragtop, "The GTO was for kids who wanted to race. The 2+2 was for men who had nothing to prove." That pretty much sums it up. The 2+2 was a muscle car in a tailored suit, and even if history didn't give it the spotlight, it remains one of Pontiac's finest hidden gems. The 1970 Chevrolet El Camino SS 454 LS6 is one of the greatest sleeper muscle machines that somehow slipped through the cracks of mainstream automotive lore. While the Chevelle SS 454 LS6 basks in legendary status, its pickup-bodied sibling, El Camino Boa, lurks quietly in the shadows, equally potent yet often overlooked. But for those who know, the LS6 El Camino is nothing short of a street-legal sledgehammer disguised as a work truck. To understand why this particular El Camino is so special, you have to go back to 1970, the zenith of the muscle car era. Insurance rates hadn't yet skyrocketed, federal regulations hadn't yet strangled horsepower, and the battle for bragging rights was all about cubic inches and quarter-mile dominance. Chevrolet's response was the LS6, a 454 cubic inch V8 factory rated at 450 horsepower and 500 lb-ft of torque, figures that were jaw-dropping at the time and remain impressive even today. The LS6 wasn't just a big engine, it was a brutal, purpose-built performance mill with a forged steel crankshaft, solid lifter camshaft, massive Holley 800 CFM carburetor, and aggressive 11.251 compression ratio. This wasn't your granddad's pickup motor. It was designed to annihilate stoplights, embarrass Corvettes, and send insurance adjusters into cold sweats. And yet, Chevrolet allowed you to spec this monstrous engine in the El Camino, a vehicle traditionally seen as a utilitarian car-truck hybrid. For those who didn't want to give up practicality but still wanted to unleash hell on the streets, this was the perfect solution. You could haul a load of lumber during the week and haul serious ass on the weekend. Visually, the El Camino SS 454 LS6 shared much of the Chevelle SS's aggressive styling. The bulging cowl induction hood, blacked-out grille, SS badging, and optional racing stripes. But because it was a truck, it often flew under the radar. At first glance, it was just another El Camino, maybe a sporty one, but nothing that screamed quarter-mile terror. This made it the ultimate factory sleeper. Performance-wise, it was a beast. In contemporary tests, LS6-powered Chevelles could clock quarter-mile times in the low 13s, sometimes dipping into the 12s with sticky tires and a fearless driver. The El Camino, carrying slightly more weight in the rear, but with better traction because of it, could match those numbers. For a pickup, that was unheard of. But the LS6 El Camino was rare right from the start. Insurance companies were already starting to penalize big block muscle, and many buyers gravitated toward the Chevelle Coupe instead. GM itself didn't push the El Camino as a performance flagship, focusing its marketing efforts on the more glamorous Chevelle SS and Corvette. As a result, production numbers were low. Estimates suggest that of the approximately 4,475 LS6-equipped Chevelles produced in 1970, only a small fraction, perhaps a few hundred, were El Caminos. By 1971, insurance premiums and stricter emissions regulations began to choke out the muscle car party. Compression ratios dropped, horsepower ratings became more conservative, and the LS6 quietly disappeared. The El Camino would continue as a model, but the days of it being offered with earth-shattering big block power were numbered. Today, the 1970 El Camino SS 454 LS6 is a coveted unicorn among collectors and enthusiasts. Its combination of sheer brute force, low production numbers, and sleeper styling makes it one of the most desirable and least talked about muscle vehicles of its era. While Chevelle LS6s command huge auction prices and Corvette enthusiasts bask in their car's fame, the LS6 El Camino remains the if you know, secret weapon. One owner summed it up best at a car show. People walk past the Chevelles, drool over the Corvettes, and then stop dead when they realize this El Camino is an LS6. That's when the smiles really start. In many ways, that's exactly what makes this truck so special. It's the muscle car that pretended to be practical, but deep down, it was always ready for a fight. The 1907 Pontiac Can-Am is one of those rare muscle car footnotes that seems almost too cool for how short-lived it was. Born in a time when muscle cars were on life support, choked by insurance rates, smog equipment, and rising fuel costs, the Can-Am was Pontiac's last hurrah for the classic muscle car formula. But corporate politics and bad timing killed it before it had a chance to shine. Today, it's a cult classic, a rare what-if story of 1970s muscle. Let's rewind to 1907. The once mighty Pontiac GTO had already been demoted to option package status and eventually disappeared altogether after 1974. But there was still a hunger among Pontiac fans for a performance-oriented coupe that could carry on the legacy of the great one. Enter Jim Wangers, the marketing guru behind the original GTO, who pitched the idea of a limited edition muscle coupe based on the Le Mans. The car would revive the aggressive looks and performance image of the GTO while keeping production costs low by using existing parts. Pontiac brass greenlit the project, and the result was the Can-Am. The Can-Am took a standard Le Mans Sport Coupe and added a raft of unique features that gave it real presence. The most eye-catching was the Trans Am-style shaker hood scoop, a part never before seen on a Le Mans. It was functional, feeding air to the engine, and gave the Can-Am a true muscle car vibe. Complementing the scoop were wild tricolor side stripes, bold Can-Am decals on the doors and rear spoiler, and color-matched rally-to wheels. Every Can-Am was painted cameo white with orange, red, and yellow striping, a color scheme inspired by the racing Can-Am series. Under the hood, buyers got Pontiac's trusty 6.6-liter, 400 cubic inch, V8 rated at 200 horsepower and 325 of torque. For California-bound cars, the emissions-choked Oldsmobile 403 V8 was used instead. Though far from the tire-shredding monsters of the late 60s, the Can-Am's engine still delivered respectable performance for the time, especially when paired with the available 3.08 limited-slip rear axle. It was no Trans Am SD 455, but it could still hustle down the quarter-mile faster than most of its smog-era peers. Inside, the Can-Am was less about luxury and more about business. Pontiac's optional rally gauge cluster, a sporty 3-spoke steering wheel, and bucket seats were available, giving it a driver-focused feel. But beyond the graphics, scoop, and badging, it was still a Le Mans underneath, which was both its strength and its Achilles heel. Pontiac initially planned to build 5,000 to 10,000 Can-Ams, but a tooling failure at Motortown Corporation, the contractor handling the shaker hood modifications, brought production to a screeching halt. Only 1,377 units were built before the program was abruptly canceled. While the tooling excuse was real, many insiders believe GM pulled the plug intentionally. The Can-Am was priced lower than a similarly equipped Trans Am and offered much of the same muscle car appeal. GM's upper management didn't want an in-house product to cannibalize Firebird sales, especially when the Trans Am was one of the few performance models still selling well. Thus, the Can-Am became a one-year-only wonder, a victim of internal politics and bad luck. Its abrupt death only added to its mystique. Because of its limited production, bold looks, and connection to Pontiac's muscle car heyday, it has become a sought-after collectible among enthusiasts. Today, spotting a real 1977 Can-Am is a rare treat. Many have succumbed to rust, accidents, or simple neglect. But for those lucky enough to own one, it's a rolling piece of Pontiac history, a glimpse of what could have been had GM let Pontiac keep swinging in the muscle car arena a little longer. As one owner put it, people think it's just a Le Mans with stickers until they hear it growl and see that shaker scoop shake. Then they ask, why haven't I seen one of these before? That's when you smile and say, because GM didn't want you to. The 1907 Pontiac Can-Am, the muscle car they didn't want you to have. The 1966 Oldsmobile Starfire L74 425 V8 is a car that time has largely forgotten, But when you peel back the layers, it becomes clear it was one of the last true gladiators of an era when personal luxury coupes still had muscle in their veins. Unlike the more famous 442 or the tempestuous GTO, the Starfire never quite fit into the muscle car mold. But that wasn't for lack of trying. In many ways, the 1966 Starfire was a misunderstood colossus, caught in a transitional period where style and brute force were being traded for youth appeal and agility. Oldsmobile introduced the Starfire in 1961 as its premium performance luxury coupe, meant to compete with cars like the Ford Thunderbird and Buick Riviera. It had always been positioned as a gentleman's car, something you could take to the country club during the week and still light up the boulevard with on Saturday night. For years, it balanced on that knife's edge between prestige and performance. But by 1910, the American car market was shifting dramatically. The muscle car boom was in full swing, and buyers were falling head over heels for lighter, faster, and cheaper A-body machines like the GTO and Chevelle SS. Yet Oldsmobile still had a segment of loyal buyers who remembered the Starfire's glory days and wanted their power served with a side of luxury. That's where the L74 425 cubic inch Super Rocket V8 came in. This was no mild cruiser engine, pushing out 375 horsepower and a monstrous 470 of torque. It was a serious mill, designed not just to move the Starfire's considerable heft, but to do so with authority. On paper, its power figure stood shoulder to shoulder with the best of the era. Yet, despite its muscle-bound heart, the Starfire was a heavyweight in a featherweight fight. With a curb weight north of 4,200 pounds, it was more battleship than sports car. Performance-wise, the Starfire could hustle, but it demanded patience. Off the line, it wasn't going to embarrass a GTO, but on the highway, it was a different story. Once that Super Rocket V8 got into its stride, the Starfire became a force of nature. It could cruise at 80 mph effortlessly, swallowing up mile after mile of open road with a serenity that smaller, louder muscle cars couldn't match. It wasn't about quarter-mile times, it was about devouring long distances in total comfort, with the occasional burst of V8 fury. Design-wise, the 1966 model was arguably the best-looking Starfire of the decade. The slab-sided bodywork was clean and modern, with tasteful chrome accents that hinted at its upmarket ambitions. The front fascia featured a wide horizontal grille flanked by quad headlights, giving it a broad-shouldered, imposing presence. Subtle Starfire badging adorned the fenders, and a sleek side character line ran the length of the car, adding a sense of motion even at rest. The rear featured modest tail fins, a nod to the jet-age styling cues of the early 60s, but toned down for a more refined, contemporary look. Inside, the Starfire was every inch a personal luxury coupe. The cabin was lavish by mid-60s standards, deep, comfortable bucket seats, a full-length console with a floor shifter, and brushed aluminum trim that gave it a technical, almost aerospace feel. The attention to detail was remarkable, with features like courtesy lights, deluxe carpeting, and a dashboard that wrapped around the driver, making you feel cocooned in a cockpit designed for grand touring, not drag racing. But despite all these virtues, the Starfire was doomed. It was too big, too heavy, and too expensive to compete with the rising tide of true muscle cars. The very things that made it special, its luxury and refinement, became liabilities in a market now obsessed with raw, no-frills performance. Even within Oldsmobile's own lineup, the cheaper, lighter 442 was stealing the spotlight. GM saw the writing on the wall and decided to quietly retire the Starfire after 1966. The name would survive for a few more years, slapped onto compact models as a shadow of its former self. But the era of the big, luxurious performance coupe was effectively over. Today, the 1966 Oldsmobile Starfire L74 425 V8 is a ghost in the muscle car pantheon. Rarely mentioned, seldom seen at shows, it exists in the shadow of its more famous siblings. Yet for those in the know, it remains a hidden gem, a symbol of a time when muscle and luxury coexisted in a way that was both dignified and unapologetically powerful. As one Oldsmobile collector put it, driving a 66 Starfire isn't like driving a muscle car. It's like piloting a rolling lounge chair with a rocket engine under the hood. You don't sprint, you surge. And when you park it, you don't jump out like some kid in a Camaro. You step out like you've arrived somewhere important. In many ways, the Starfire's quiet fade into obscurity mirrors its personality. Never flashy, never loud, but always commanding respect in its own subtle. The 1970 Chevrolet Nova SS 396 L78 stands today as one of those rare gems in muscle car history, the kind of car that seems almost too wild to have been real, yet too easily overshadowed to be properly celebrated. Everyone remembers the Chevelle SS 396, or the later Nova SS 350s, but this particular big block bruiser was a fleeting moment when Chevrolet took their smallest platform and stuffed it with one of their most powerful engines, creating a car that was more of a street brawler than a polished towerman. To fully appreciate the 1970 Nova SS 396 L78, you have to remember what the Nova was supposed to be. Introduced as a simple, affordable, compact car, the Nova's mission was basic: practical transportation for the everyman. But by the late 60s, with the muscle car craze in full swing, even the humble Nova couldn't resist getting a little meaner. Chevy's idea was simple: take the lightest body in the lineup, give it the biggest engine available, and see what happens. And in the case of the L78 equipped Nova, what happened was spectacular. Under the hood sat the 396 cubic inch L78 V8, a big block monster rated at 375 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 415 lb of torque. This wasn't some watered-down smog motor or a polite cruiser engine. The L78 was a solid lifter, high-compression brute, shared with the hottest Chevelles and Camaros of the time. Equipped with a Holley 780 CFM carburetor, forged pistons, a steel crankshaft, and beefy rectangular port heads, this engine was built for serious enthusiasts. And in a car as small and as light as the Nova, it transformed the humble grocery getter into a street-legal predator. Performance was blistering. Road tests at the time saw the L78 Nova SS running mid-13-second quarter-mile times on stock tires with trap speeds over 105 mph. That was serious muscle for 1970, putting it in direct competition with the big names like the Plymouth Roadrunner and Dodge Super Bee, and even threatening to embarrass bigger, heavier siblings like the Chevelle SS 396. The Nova was lighter, more agile, and, importantly, cheaper, giving it a unique spot in the Chevy lineup. But therein lay the problem. GM's internal politics didn't want the Nova stealing the Chevelle's thunder. The Chevelle SS was the muscle car poster child, the big seller, the one with all the marketing muscle behind it. The Nova was supposed to stay in its lane as the budget option. A Nova that could outrun a Chevelle SS was inconvenient. And so, Chevrolet quietly pulled the plug. 1970 was the final year the Nova would get the L78 option. After building just 3,765 examples, GM decided that was enough. From 1971 onwards, the Nova SS would be relegated to small block power, still respectable, but no longer the fire-breathing big block menace it had briefly been. The 396 became exclusive to larger models, and the Nova returned to being the affordable muscle-light option. Visually, the 1970 Nova SS 396 L78 wasn't as loud about its capabilities as some of its peers. It had subtle SS badging, a blacked-out grille, body-colored bumpers, and simple chrome accents. Unlike the flamboyant stripes and spoilers of the Chevelle or Camaro, the Nova wore its performance credentials with understated menace. Buyers who knew what they were getting were the only ones in on the secret. That made it a sleeper in the truest sense of the word. Inside, the Nova SS remained Spartan. Bucket seats, a simple dash with a tachometer, and not much else. This was a car built for going fast in straight lines, not for coddling passengers. Every inch of it spoke to the muscle car ethos: light, fast, no nonsense. Today, the 1970 Nova SS 396 L78 is a rare and coveted machine among collectors and muscle car purists. It represents the last of an era when GM allowed its smaller cars to play with the big dogs, before insurance rates, emissions regulations, and corporate bean counters clipped the wings of the muscle car movement. Surviving examples fetch high prices at auctions, especially those with documented L78 options, 4-speed transmissions, and original drivetrains. One Nova enthusiast once summed it up perfectly. The L78 Nova wasn't built to win beauty contests, it was built to take your lunch money and be halfway down the street before you knew what happened. In the grand tapestry of muscle car history, the 1970 Nova SS 396 L78 is a brief, brilliant flash. A compact car that packed a heavyweight punch, only to be reined in by corporate caution. But for those who got their hands on one, it was, and still is, one of Chevrolet's most potent, underappreciated weapons. Want me to give you the same kind of long-forgotten deep dive on another one-year-only muscle car unicorn? Maybe something like the 1969 Mercury Cyclone Spoiler 2 or the 1971 Dodge Charger Super B 440 6-pack. The 1974 Pontiac GTO on the X-Body Ventura platform stands as one of the most disheartening and telling episodes in the muscle car saga. A tragic swan song that symbolizes the fading glory of an era when American muscle was forced to bow to new realities. Once a fierce and dominant figure in the muscle car pantheon, the GTO in 1974 was a pale shadow of its former self, struggling to maintain relevance amid the encroaching storms of government regulations, soaring insurance premiums, and the shifting demands of a fuel-conscious public. To fully grasp why the 1974 GTO is often derided and dismissed by muscle car enthusiasts, it's important to understand the context of the early 1970s. Muscle cars, which had dominated the streets and drag strips throughout the 1960s, were now being squeezed by a perfect storm of external pressures. Emissions laws introduced by the EPA were drastically reducing engine outputs. Insurance companies were slapping punishing premiums on high-performance cars, effectively pricing out the youthful buyers who fueled the muscle car boom. The oil crisis of 1973 had sent gas prices soaring and made fuel efficiency a national priority, putting a final nail in the coffin for big block V8s that guzzled fuel with abandon. Against this backdrop, Pontiac made the fateful decision to graft the iconic GTO badge onto the X-Body platform, the same underpinning as the Chevrolet Ventura, a compact, economy-minded sedan hardly fit for the muscle car name. Gone were the days of powerful big block engines and aggressive, eye-catching styling. Instead, the 1974 GTO was powered by a relatively tame 350 cubic inch V8 engine, now rated at a disappointing 200 horsepower, due to detuning for emissions compliance. Compared to earlier GTOs that routinely pushed 300-plus horsepower, this was a gut punch to anyone who remembered the GTO's former might. The performance was pedestrian at best. The 0 to 60 times lagged behind competitors, and the car's overall demeanor was more family cruiser than street king. The roar of muscle was replaced with a muted growl, and the connection between driver and car was all but lost. The once proud GTO had become a shadow of its former self, struggling to live up to a nameplate steeped in performance heritage. Stylistically, the 1974 GTO was equally uninspiring. The design abandoned the aggressive and iconic cues that made earlier models so striking. The bold split grille and sharp muscular lines were replaced with a bland, almost anonymous front fascia. The thick, heavy pillars and formal roof colonnade styling made the car look more bloated and less agile. The overall appearance was a far cry from the lean, mean, and purposeful machines that had once defined the GTO name. The mismatched badge on a clearly economy-based body sent a confusing message. The car looked like an imposter trying to claim glory without earning it. Marketing for this final GTO was half-hearted at best. Pontiac dealers were reluctant to push what was essentially a compromise model, and consumers, particularly muscle car purists, recoiled from the diluted product. Sales plummeted compared to previous years, a clear indication that the market no longer had appetite for the GTO in this form. The 1974 model year effectively marked the end of the muscle car era for Pontiac's flagship performance model, as GM quietly dropped the GTO nameplate after this year. Though often mocked and overlooked, the 1974 GTO holds an important place in automotive history. It represents the harsh realities that muscle cars faced as the muscle car golden era gave way to a period of malaise, uncertainty, and compromise. For collectors and historians, it serves as a poignant reminder of how external forces, regulation, economics, and changing tastes can reshape and sometimes dismantle even the most legendary of automotive icons. Today, the 1974 GTO is a rare and misunderstood relic. It's a car that challenges enthusiasts to reconcile their nostalgia for the muscle car heyday with the unvarnished truth of what the market forced manufacturers to do. It may not have the glory or excitement of earlier GTOs, but it stands as a somber monument to a beloved nameplate's final chapter. A reminder that not every muscle car story ends with victory and speed. Sometimes it ends with quiet concession and fading echoes of the past. If you want, I can expand further on how this model affected Pontiac's strategy going forward, or explore similar last-ditch muscle cars from other manufacturers that met comparable fates in the mid-1970s. The 1968 Buick Riviera GS 430 is a fascinating, somewhat enigmatic chapter in the story of American muscle cars, a vehicle that both embraced and sidestepped the muscle car craze of the late 1960s, embodying Buick's particular brand of power wrapped in refined luxury. Unlike the raw, aggressive muscle cars that scream for attention on the streets, the Riviera GS 430 took a different approach. It aimed to be a sophisticated, full-size personal luxury coupe that delivered serious performance while still maintaining Buick's hallmark of quiet, comfortable cruising. It was a car for a discerning buyer who wanted muscle without the gaudy flash, power without the harshness, and style without sacrificing comfort. At its heart was the 430 cubic inch V8 engine, a big, burly powerhouse delivering a respectable 360 horsepower. While it didn't quite match the raw output of some of its muscle car contemporaries, like the 425 or 455 cubic inch engines found in some Pontiacs and Oldsmobiles, it was no slouch. Coupled with a heavy-duty suspension and a limited slip differential, the GS 430 had the mechanical underpinnings to provide a driving experience that balanced power with control. The limited slip differential helped tame the torque and ensured that power reached the pavement efficiently, allowing for better traction and more confident acceleration. However, unlike the sharper, more focused muscle cars designed for spirited driving and drag strip dominance, the Riviera's suspension and chassis tuning were aimed at offering a smoother, more composed ride, emphasizing ride quality over aggressive handling. Stylistically, the 1968 Riviera GS 430 was a marvel of Buick's design language at the time, a long, wide, and imposing coupe with sleek, flowing lines that conveyed elegance and sophistication. Its broad shoulders and sweeping curves gave it presence, but it never descended into the brash, almost cartoonish territory that some muscle cars occupied. Instead, it carried itself with a dignified aura, the kind of car that suited a more mature audience. The interior followed suit with plush, comfortable seating, high-quality materials, and a focus on quiet luxury. Thick carpeting, well-padded seats, and a well-insulated cabin ensured that passengers were cocooned from road noise and harshness, a stark contrast to the loud, rattling interiors of many muscle cars. Despite its solid performance credentials and upscale appeal, the GS 430's biggest challenge was its identity crisis. It was too heavy and plush to be a pure muscle car, yet it carried enough muscle to confuse buyers who expected either a full muscle experience or a pure luxury cruiser. Its grand size and weight made it less nimble and more lumbering than the smaller, more agile muscle cars, and it lacked the visceral aggression and immediacy that fans craved. For many muscle car enthusiasts, the Riviera GS 430 felt like a half-step, a compromise that didn't quite deliver the full muscle car thrill or the full luxury experience. It was, in a sense, caught between worlds, too refined for muscle car purists, too muscular for traditional luxury buyers. Adding to its obscurity was the timing of its release. By 1968, the muscle car market was becoming more competitive, with manufacturers doubling down on increasingly powerful and aggressive models. The gas crisis and rising insurance premiums loomed on the horizon, signaling the beginning of the end for many muscle cars. Buick, never a brand focused on youth and rebellion, quietly backed away from muscle cars, preferring to focus on their core strengths in comfort and luxury. As a result, the GS 430 didn't receive the marketing push or the enthusiast attention it might have in an earlier or different era. Today, the 1968 Buick Riviera GS 430 is a rare gem for collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its unique blend of power and refinement. It serves as a reminder that muscle cars weren't always about loud paint schemes, big spoilers, and road aggression. Sometimes muscle came cloaked in understated elegance, combining brute strength with a smooth, comfortable ride. The GS 430 is a heavy, powerful cruiser that quietly defied muscle car stereotypes, a testament to Buick's desire to carve out its own niche in a rapidly evolving automotive landscape. Its rarity and distinct personality have earned it a cult following among collectors who value it not just for what it was, but for what it represents. A sophisticated muscle car that dared to be different, and a symbol of an era when American automakers were still experimenting with what muscle really meant. The 1971 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS 454 is one of those fascinating muscle car anomalies, a vehicle that seems almost like a contradiction wrapped in steel, a rare hybrid between muscle car rawness and personal luxury sophistication. Unlike the aggressive, in-your-face muscle cars of the late 1960s and early 70s, the Monte Carlo SS 454 was carefully crafted to appeal to a different kind of buyer. Someone who wanted the power and performance of a big block V8 but wrapped in a more elegant, refined package. It's a muscle car wearing a tailored suit rather than wrapped with jeans and a leather jacket. At the heart of this car was the legendary LS5 454 cubic-inch V8 engine, a beast capable of producing a robust 365 horsepower and an enormous amount of torque, enough to catapult the Monte Carlo from 0 to 60 in just over 6 seconds, a respectable figure for a nearly 4,200-pound car. The 454 engine was a monster, revered in muscle car circles for its ability to deliver brutal acceleration and relentless power, a true expression of Detroit's muscle car heyday. Yet, under the hood of this Monte Carlo, it was almost understated, the car's exterior hiding the true performance potential beneath. The body itself was all about personal luxury, a long, sleek coupe with flowing lines, a long hood, a sloping roofline, and a well-appointed interior that emphasized comfort over outright sportiness. Leather seats, plush carpeting, wood grain accents, and a host of convenience features made it clear that this was a car for cruising in style as much as it was for burning rubber. The suspension was tuned for a smooth ride rather than sharp handling, emphasizing the car's dual identity as a cruiser and a muscle car. It was the kind of car that would feel just as comfortable on a Sunday drive through the countryside as it would tearing up the drag strip. However, the Monte Carlo SS 454's dual nature was both its blessing and its curse. While it offered muscle car power with a luxury car demeanor, it never quite found its niche among traditional muscle car fans, who often viewed it as too heavy, too refined, and too soft compared to the raw, aggressive cars they admired. On the other hand, personal luxury car buyers were often put off by the raucous engine and performance focus, making it difficult for Chevrolet to market the car effectively. It was caught between worlds: too much muscle for the luxury market, too much luxury for the muscle market. Production numbers were limited. Only 1,919 units of the 1971 Monte Carlo SS 454 were built, making it a rare bird even in its heyday. By the next year, the muscle car era was waning rapidly. Rising insurance premiums, increasing government emissions regulations, and a shift in buyer preferences towards smaller, more economical cars led to the demise of many high-performance muscle packages. The Monte Carlo SS 454's performance package was quietly discontinued after 1971, and the car reverted to more pedestrian engine options in subsequent years. Today, the 1971 Monte Carlo SS 454 occupies a unique place in muscle car lore. It is a secret weapon among collectors and enthusiasts who appreciate its subtle blend of luxury and muscle, a reminder that muscle cars didn't have to be loud and gaudy to be powerful and thrilling. It's a vehicle that challenges the traditional muscle car stereotype, offering brute force with a touch of class and sophistication. For those who know about it, driving a Monte Carlo SS 454 is like holding a rare piece of automotive history, a reminder of a time when car makers experimented boldly with form and function, even if the market wasn't quite ready for such a blend. It's muscle car history's quiet rebel, elegant yet ferocious, a true classic hiding in plain sight. The 1975 Oldsmobile Hurst Olds W30 occupies a uniquely bittersweet place in automotive history, emblematic of an era when muscle cars were struggling to survive in an evolving landscape that was increasingly hostile to their once glorious ideals. By the mid-1970s, the muscle car phenomenon that had dominated the American automotive scene for over a decade was rapidly fading. The combination of strict emissions regulations, soaring insurance premiums, the oil crisis, and shifting consumer priorities towards safety and fuel economy had squeezed the performance out of these once ferocious machines. The Hurst Olds W30 was a last gasp, a whispered echo of the roaring muscle car symphony that had defined the late 1960s and early 1970s. This particular model, the 1975 Hurst Olds W30, was far removed from the days when the W30 package was synonymous with unrelenting power and aggressive street performance. It still sported the massive 455 cubic inch V8, the heart and soul of Oldsmobile's muscle legacy, but the engine was heavily detuned, producing a modest 190 to 225 horsepower, a shadow of the 360-plus horsepower versions from just a few years earlier. This was the direct result of a growing web of federal emissions requirements that mandated lower tailpipe pollutants, forcing manufacturers to add restrictive air pumps, catalytic converters, and other equipment that choked the engine's natural performance. Coupled with mandated lower-octane fuels and increasingly complex ignition systems, the net effect was a loss of the raw power and visceral thrill that muscle car enthusiasts craved. The physical design of the 1975 Hurst Olds W30 clung to some of the visual bravado that had characterized the muscle car heyday, but even here the spirit was compromised. The car featured bold gold striping and unique Hurst badging that called back to the W30's glory days, but the overall stance was more subdued. The optional T-tops offered a glimmer of modernity and sportiness, promising open-air freedom in a world growing more sanitized and regulated. But the car's bulkier frame and softened lines made it less of a prowling beast and more of a gentle giant forced into submission. Inside, the W30 offered a comfortable, somewhat plush interior, reflecting muscle cars' gradual drift toward personal luxury cars. This change in character was as much about market survival as it was about shifting tastes. Muscle cars were no longer just about brute force and speed, but also about blending performance with comfort and everyday usability. Yet for all these adaptations, the 1975 W30 felt like a muscle car in exile, a performer who had been forced off the stage and into the wings. GM's marketing efforts for the 1975 Hurst Olds W30 were restrained, almost resigned. The company understood that muscle cars were no longer the automotive heroes they had been and did little to promote the model. Production numbers dwindled, and the W30's presence faded quickly from the spotlight, overshadowed by newer, more fuel-efficient vehicles and the growing popularity of imports that offered reliability and modern features. For many, the 1975 W30 was barely on the radar, a quiet, almost forgotten chapter of muscle car history. Today, the 1975 Oldsmobile Hurst Olds W30 is a collector's curiosity, a poignant reminder of a time when American muscle cars were losing their grip on the market, but refusing to disappear without a fight. It is cherished not for breakneck speed or jaw-dropping design, but as a living testament to resilience, a symbol of the muscle car's twilight years. Enthusiasts admire it for its connection to a golden era, for the echoes of power still lurking beneath its hood, and for the story it tells about the American auto industry's tumultuous shift during one of its most challenging decades. In the end, the 1975 Hurst Olds W30 is less a muscle car and more a survivor, a fading icon struggling to keep the flame alive as the muscle car era quietly gave way to the demands of a new automotive age. It encapsulates the transition from unrestrained horsepower to cautious compliance, from wild style to measured luxury, and from youthful rebellion to mature compromise. And in that bittersweet tension lies its lasting appeal. The 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix SJ428HO stands as a fascinating testament to a unique intersection in the muscle car era, one where brute force and luxury collided in a way few other cars dared to attempt. Unlike the loud, aggressive machines that typically define muscle cars of the late 1960s, the Grand Prix SJ428HO was a different breed, a personal luxury coupe that hid its snarling heart beneath a sleek, refined exterior, making it a rare and often overlooked gem in Pontiac's storied performance lineup. At first glance, the Grand Prix SJ doesn't shout muscle. It wears the guise of sophistication with long, sweeping lines and a spacious, plush interior designed to pamper its occupants rather than intimidate other drivers on the street. The design was aimed at buyers who wanted the comfort of a luxury car, but with the hidden firepower of a muscle machine waiting under the hood. This made the SJ a kind of muscle car for grown-ups, less about raw flash and more about understated power and refined performance. Its wide, low stance, emphasized by the extraordinarily long hood that seemed to stretch endlessly like the deck of an aircraft carrier, gave it an imposing presence on the road that only those who paid attention would fully appreciate. Beneath this polished exterior roared Pontiac's mighty 428 cubic inch V8 high output HO engine, officially rated at 390 horsepower. This was no mere luxury cruiser engine. It was a serious, performance-oriented mill capable of propelling the nearly 4,000-pound coupe with authority. The 428 HO was renowned for its robust torque and smooth delivery, making the Grand Prix not just quick in a straight line, but also confident and stable through corners, thanks to its sophisticated suspension tuning and relatively balanced chassis. Despite the heavier weight and more refined setup compared to more traditional muscle cars, the SJ could surprise unsuspecting rivals, especially those who underestimated the car's true capabilities. Yet for all its power and potential, the 1969 Grand Prix SJ 428 HO was never fully embraced as a muscle car by Pontiac or the public. Unlike the company's GTO or Firebird, which were aggressively marketed and adorned with bold graphics and distinctive styling cues, the SJ quietly played its cards close to the vest. It had none of the flamboyance or visual aggression that muscle car buyers often sought. No massive hood scoops, no wild racing stripes, no aggressive stance shouting, "Look at me." This stealth approach meant it failed to ignite the passion of the youth market or muscle car enthusiasts craving the flashiest ride on the block. Instead, it quietly attracted a smaller, more discerning audience, those who appreciated power combined with luxury, comfort, and a touch of exclusivity. Only a modest number of these Grand Prix SJ428 HO models were produced, which today adds to their mystique and collectability. The car's rarity is compounded by the fact that it quickly faded from Pontiac's lineup as muscle cars gave way to changing regulations, insurance pressures, and shifting buyer preferences. By the early 1970s, muscle cars were waning in popularity, and Pontiac's focus shifted towards more conventional performance and luxury vehicles. The Grand Prix SJ428 HO quietly slipped into the shadows, overshadowed by more celebrated and visibly muscular models. Collectors today prize the 1969 Grand Prix SJ428 HO for exactly what it represents: a bridge between muscle and luxury, a car that offered powerful V8 performance without sacrificing refinement or comfort. It's a rare example of how muscle car culture wasn't just about loud engines and flashy designs, but also about engineering balance and offering muscle in a package that suited a different kind of buyer. Enthusiasts who own and cherish these cars often speak of the driving experience as unique. Smooth yet aggressive, comfortable yet thrilling, an old-school cruiser with a surprising bite. The 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix SJ428 HO embodies an era of automotive experimentation when muscle car makers explored new ways to deliver power to the streets without alienating customers who wanted a touch of sophistication. It's a muscle car that wasn't meant for the drag strip or the street racing scene, but rather for those who wanted a car that could quietly dominate highways and expressways while turning heads for its sleek presence and impressive engine note. In sum, the Grand Prix SJ428HO is a muscle car wrapped in a velvet glove, a rare beast that flew under the radar for decades but remains a coveted icon among enthusiasts who appreciate that muscle car legacy isn't just about flash and fury, but also about subtlety, power, and exclusivity. It's a reminder that in the muscle car era, not every performance masterpiece needed to shout. Some simply purred with quiet authority and left a lasting impression on those who dared to look closer. The 1973 Chevrolet SM 454 LS4 Coupe stands as a bittersweet symbol of the final flicker of muscle car glory before the era was snuffed out by tightening emissions regulations, insurance headaches, and shifting consumer tastes. It was, in many ways, the last true big block SS Chevelle, but it arrived in an era when the muscle car's roar was being muffled, both literally and figuratively. The story of the 1990 SS 454 LS4 is one of decline wrapped in a badge that once represented raw, unapologetic power. By 1973, the muscle car world was in turmoil. What had been a golden age of high-performance V8s and brutal horsepower numbers was now grappling with new federal mandates aimed at reducing emissions, as well as a growing public concern about fuel economy. Manufacturers scrambled to comply, but the result was a watered-down performance landscape that left muscle car enthusiasts disappointed and disillusioned. For Chevrolet, this meant the proud Chevelle S454 was no longer the powerhouse it had been just a few years prior. The 1973 Chevelle SS454 was now built on the Colonnade body platform, a design that marked a drastic departure from the sleek hardtop coupes of the late 1960s. The new body style was bulkier, heavier, and surrounded by thick B-pillars that replaced the popular pillarless hardtop design. This meant that the car lost some of the clean, aggressive silhouette that had made previous Chevelles so visually striking. Instead, the 1973 model looked more like a bloated family sedan trying in vain to masquerade as a muscle car, a fact that alienated many fans who lamented the loss of the original Chevelle's aggressive styling. Underneath the hood, the star of the show was the LS4 454 cubic-inch big block V8. But don't let the displacement fool you. This engine was no longer the beast of the late 60s. Emissions controls, including smog pumps and detuned carburetors, robbed the LS4 of much of its earlier thunder. Rated at a modest 275 horsepower, it was a far cry from the 450-plus HP ratings of just a few years earlier with the LS6 engine. The massive 454 engine now struggled to move the heavier car with anything resembling the muscle it once flexed so effortlessly. Performance was compromised, and the thrill was muted. The exhaust note lost its deep, aggressive growl, replaced by a quieter, more subdued tone that seemed to apologize for its presence rather than announce it boldly. Adding to the woes was the timing. The muscle car market was shrinking fast, and Chevrolet knew the end was near. The SS 454 badge itself was losing its meaning, morphing into little more than a trim level rather than a symbol of raw performance. By 1974, the SS nameplate was stripped of any serious muscle connotations, becoming just another package on the Chevelle lineup with no true big block engine to back it up. The 1973 SS 454 LS4, therefore, stands as the last echo of that muscle car heyday, a car caught in the transitional period between the golden years and the forced retreat from high-performance machines. Because it arrived at this crossroads, the 1973 Chevelle SS 454 LS4 didn't capture much attention when new, nor did it inspire the kind of enthusiasm seen in earlier muscle car models. It was overshadowed by the memories of its powerful predecessors and the growing interest in smaller, more efficient cars. Sales were modest, and it never earned the iconic status of earlier Chevelle SS models. Today it remains a forgotten footnote, a muscle car that once roared but was gradually hushed into silence. Collectors who seek the 1973 Chevelle SS 454 LS4 often do so because they appreciate its place in history rather than its outright performance. It's a car that tells a story of the muscle car's fading dominance and the auto industry's reluctant adaptation to new realities. In the right hands, it can still deliver a respectable blast of power, but it's never going to recapture the pure, untamed spirit of the late 1960s Chevelles. In the end, the 1973 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS4 is a poignant reminder that the muscle car era wasn't just about peak horsepower and aggressive styling, bueno. It was also about timing. This car came too late, too restricted, and too compromised to truly live up to the legacy of the SS badge. Yet, for enthusiasts who understand its story, it remains a compelling symbol of a bygone age, the last breath of a muscle car titan struggling to hold on to its identity amid a rapidly changing automotive world.